Check it out. After 11 years of breeding apples and growing apples from seed, I finally have the red-fleshed apple that I want to eat. Not only that, it's probably the best overall red-fleshed apple I've ever eaten. There's a lot out there and quite a few I haven't tried. But yeah, yes, I did it. Look, I did it. So not only that, I did it in a single generation by choosing good parents, which we'll talk about. So here's the basic story. When I moved here, I started collecting, just got into apples, and I started collecting apples. I've collected hundreds of varieties over the time I've been here, named varieties, heirlooms, and stuff like that. I got interested in these red flesh apples that Albert Etter, an apple breeder in, the first half of the last century, he was breeding these apples, but he just never really finished. Like, he got old and died, and pretty much nobody took his work forward. More recently, people have, but, for a very, very long time, a lot of them were probably lost. But, a few survived, and I was growing those, and I fruited them, and I thought, these are amazing, but they're not. They have a bunch of problems, and, this work should be continued. Like, why hasn't someone continued this work? So one of my main goals when I started breeding apples, the main goal, was to breed, again, the red-fleshed apple that I want to eat, and this is it. The first year I used an apple called grenadine as my main red flesh donor in breeding. So in breeding, we're taking two apples, right? And we're saying, what happens if we cross these two specific apples together? And then in future generations of breeding, you can keep adding to that, right? You can take any apple that you make and cross it with more apples. The point being to refine the apples and make them better and better. So I used grenadine for two reasons. Very red flesh, it's like a really dark pink, and the intense flavor. And I thought, well, okay, this apple has a bunch of other problems. The texture is not very good. It suffers from a lot of early drops. The skin is quite thick and pretty puckery, like it has a lot of drying tannin that makes your mouth pucker up, But I thought, well, I'm just going to go for the traits I want, and we'll just, try to tease out the good stuff and leave the bad stuff behind over the generations. The first year I probably planted about 70 plus seedlings of grenadine, specific crosses with grenadine with other apples that I chose. By the next year or two, I was thinking, okay, well, I did a bunch of grenadine, now I'm going to use Rubaiyat. So Rubaiyat is also an Etter apple. It is just more refined. Like, at its best, it has a really good texture, actually really excellent. It's just that you rarely get it in good condition. I rarely have a good Rubaiyat year, and it almost seems to be more toward a red than a pink. I'll show you a picture here. And it still has a lot of that kind of like what I call red flesh flavor, which is like berries, fruit punch, really complex and delicious. But it didn't have as much as grenadine, but I thought, it's probably in the genes to express stronger flavors. So I'm going to use this apple because it's more refined. In 2013, I crossed that with King David, and 9 years later, this fruited. So one generation. King David is a really high quality apple. Like, here, it's definitely kind of a top 10 apple, although that's always shifting, right? Actually now, this is really encouraging. My seedlings are competing with my old top 10 list, which is great. That's what I want, right? It's all about improvement. And this would definitely drop in my top 10 now. So it's not going to bump King David out, but King David is really richly flavored, it's just really delicious. And it has a great sugar acid balance, and it's just a good eating experience overall. It also has very dark red skin. I'll show you a picture of that. From the very beginning, when I started breeding apples, I thought, if I cross really dark red skinned apples with red fleshed apples, maybe there would be some synergy in those color genes of the two that would cause the fruits to produce red-fleshed apples more often in the offspring. I'm still not sure that's true, although I suspect that it is, but that was part of the reason that I made this cross, and also just the quality. The tree is only like I straightened it out, and it's about to hear me, so it's probably like 5 feet tall. It's just scrappy. It's shaded out, kind of overshadowed by these bigger trees. This one actually produced fruit on branches that were leaning away from the light and like down on the ground. Like, they literally were, some of them were hanging on the ground. And that's really encouraging too, because if I can get an apple of this quality growing under those conditions on this little stunted tree that's fruited for the very first time this year, and they often improve and change as they fruit more, like as the tree gets established with, these terrible conditions basically. And it produced maybe like 6 or 7 apples, and a lot of them were around this size, like maybe 3 or 4 of them were like this. That's really encouraging, because when we get this tree grafted out into the sun on a real tree, it will probably be even better. It will probably also get even a darker red skin. Anyway, I had some early, like the first one I picked was way underripe because I didn't know when to pick them. And then I had one and I was like, wow, this isn't ripe, but it's really, really encouraging. And I'll show you a little clip of that right now. Cool. Check this out, new King David Rubaiyat cross. That's really promising. It's not ripe yet, but it's looking really good. And finally, I had two left that seemed to be just right at the beginning of December. Now, you could probably pick this earlier and ripen it off the tree more if, you know, apples won't hang that late or if they're going to freeze in your climate. But that's an unknown at this point. The other thing is the season could change as the apple tree matures, if it's growing out on a tree in the sun and everything. There could be a slight shift in the ripening time. Mostly solid red flesh. There's a little bit of like light whitish yellow or pink mottling in there, but it's pretty solid. Let's taste it. It's so good. This is crisp. That's unusual in a red fleshed apple that's actually ripe. A lot of times by the time they're ripe, they're starting to get mealy and stuff. This is very crisp, very juicy. The flesh is kind of a coarse grain. I would call it like a medium coarse grain. Some apples just have a very coarse grain. A lot of famous apples even, like Cox's Orange Pippin's a good example of a very coarse grain fleshed apple that's not this crisp, by the way. But this has a nice crisp, a nice crunch, but it crushes up easy and it releases a ton of juice. So it's a really good eating experience that way. The skin is not too thick either. I have a lot of grenadine offspring because, like I said, I planted like 70 seedlings of grenadine. Commonly, they have that tannic acid in the skin, and they have a thick skin that like you really have to kind of work at, and this doesn't have that. This has a pretty thin skin. So as far as the flavor goes, this has a pretty good helping of like those kind of fruit punch and berry flavors. More than half the reason that I'm interested in red fleshed apples. The color's cool, yeah, but it's the red flesh flavor. And this has quite a bit. It gets your attention. Like there's enough of it that you're like, wow, this is really delicious and different. I always want more of that. So in future generations, I mean, if we keep breeding with these things and piling up flavor genes, because there's other apples that don't have red flesh that also have really strong fruity flavors, we're going to get apples that are so fruity and intense that some people just won't like them. They're just going to be over the top. Like some people were just visiting and we tasted this apple. I fed them this apple, which is Appaloosa. We'll talk about that in a minute, which is a grenadine seedling, and it has even more of that kind of type of complex fruit punch flavor. And this guy was like, wow, it tastes like candy, you know. It really, like, the flavors are super intense. So I always want more of that, and that's, you know, why we keep breeding, because we're going to develop that. But it has a lot and it gets your attention and it's absolutely delicious. Now this apple is going to be my primary breeder, right? Because this is a process of building on successes. Breeding plants and animals, it's like they're building blocks, right? You get some improvements, you take those improvements forward into other apples. So this is now my primary breeder. I've been making the list of apples I'm going to cross-pollinate this spring for my breeding project. And almost every apple in there, like, you know, it's Wixon crossed with this, you know, Pilot crossed with this, everything's crossed with this. And then I have a whole list of things I want to cross onto this, so that, meaning that I'll take the pollen from these other apples and put them onto the flowers of this. This is going to be my primary breeder going forward. It has huge potential for that. But just straight up, this is a delicious, excellent dessert apple. I don't see any of the flaws that we typically see in red-fleshed apples in this apple so far. And I don't expect that many of them will crop up. Again, one of the major problems is that by the time these apples like Rubaiyat or Grenadine, and just almost all of them that I've had, develop the red flesh and develop the flavor, and all the sugar, the starches in the apple turn into sugar, the texture is starting to go downhill. But this is like prime eating right now, and it's super crisp and delicious and a great eating experience. So if you've ever been told that you can't grow good apples from seed, well, that's not true. Sometimes they're not good, sometimes they are good. This one's good. This is a cross between an apple called King David and an apple called Rubaiyat. It is delicious. It has like a nice berry flavor. It's got this beautiful red flesh. It's quite crisp. Listen to this. I'm too busy eating it to talk. It's so good. Yum, this is delicious. Overall, the best quality red-fleshed apple I've bred yet. It has like the good, deep pink flesh, but it still has high dessert quality. It's quite tart, but plenty sweet. This is a winner, folks. So this one here is called Appaloosa, and this is a Grenadine X Lady Williams cross, and it has turned out to be quite good. This is the first year I've gotten a lot of fruit. You can see it's a nice large apple, and this branch overproduced apples. Like, it produced way too many apples, but I kept them on there because they were all cross pollinations that I'm using for breeding. As soon as this fruited years ago, it almost died. It almost was killed out by a vole. I was like, I'm going to breed with that apple because it's better than Grenadine. It seemed better than Grenadine. But then the tree almost died, and it was years and years before I got any more fruit. I've tasted just a few little stunted apples really over the last many years, but still I could tell that it seemed like it might be a lot like an improved Grenadine, with improved texture, and that has kind of turned out to be the case. It has even more flavor than that apple. This year, the flesh color development hasn't been great in this apple, and I think this year in general, it seems like the red flesh development in general is not as good. I've seen this, and I'll show you a picture, as dark as Grenadine. It is always shown to be the seedling that has the most, I think, of that complex, rich fruit punch flavor. Okay. Man, so good. Let me finish eating this and I'll tell you about it. So usually when people visit, I feed them apples because I want to see what their reaction is and everything. And like I said, I just fed this apple to some people, and they were mind blown by the flavor. And of course the color too, that always excites people. But this apple, I would say, has some flaws. Right now, it's probably at its best eating right about now, but the texture is starting to get just a hint of kind of mealiness. If you handed this to almost anybody, I'm a snob, right? Because my whole job is assessing apples for the highest quality and trying to take that forward. But if you handed this to most people and they bit into it, unless you're a weirdo like my mom who doesn't like apples that don't taste like apples, so she's not really into these, but they would just be mind blown, and they'd be like, wow, this is amazing. They'd want to eat more of them. And it really is very good. I've been eating a ton of these because I grew a lot this year, and they're just absolutely delicious and good. But it's starting to get that texture problem as it sits around, whether it's in the fridge or on the tree. It's going to get more of that problem. And the skin is thick, not nearly as tannic as Grenadine, but it has that tannic thing. At this point, with this apple right here in particular, like this specimen, those are almost like, nitpicking, but that's my job, is to nitpick and get the best apples. This apple's worth growing, like as is, this is still worth growing, but I'm just trying to demonstrate that these traits in the parents matter and they get passed on. So the next generation of this, when I'm crossing this with things like King David, for sure, which I've already done, those seedlings are growing. Like, I have a lot of seedlings of this already growing because I've been using it anytime I can get pollen for years, and I've sent out pollen to other people. I've sent out cross-pollinated seeds to other people. I've sent out open pollinated seeds of this to other people. So the plants are in the ground growing, and it's just a matter of time till we get to see what those are like. And I will probably continue to use this for breeding because I think it's very worthy. So this is Appaloosa, and I will have scions of this year because I intentionally tried to grow more scions so I can put more of them on auction. So as far as the availability of this apple, the tree is really small. I went and looked at it, and there's actually a fair amount of scion wood on it. It actually grew decently well this year. So I will have some scions. This is an apple that I could consider, trying to leverage to get funds for my project. Now, the usual way that you would do that is to create a patent that makes it illegal for, say, someone like you to graft this and grow it in your yard or trade the scions or anything like that. So the way that would work is the patent lasts for 20 years. And if someone else were to graft it, like a nursery or something, they would just owe me like a royalty on the apple for 20 years. That kind of goes against my whole ethos of this entire project, which is about the apples. It's about improving apples and making new yummy apples for our human family to enjoy, and to encourage other people to do the same thing and breed apples and create a huge amount of new diversity of, especially like really unique stuff like this. I would consider doing it if it was easy enough and I thought it would actually work. especially actually if I could get this into the like modern food system, into grocery stores and stuff, because the truth is more people would get to eat it. But there's some problems with that. One is that you can't protect the patent. People like you are going to graft it and grow it, and I want that. I want you guys, I want fruit collectors to be trading, grafting, growing, talking about, like, that's the whole point to me, because I'm a fruit nerd. So then the other problem is that if it were to have any wide distribution, like if it were to actually get into grocery stores, for instance, then it needs to be tested a lot further, right? We need to know what its disease resistance is. We need to know what climates it does well in. Growers, if they're going to invest and grow thousands of trees and produce tons and tons of fruit, they need to know what's up with the apple and that it's actually going to pan out, right? That whole process is just really long and fraught with difficulties, and then it may not work out in the long run. It's a huge investment, and it's just really kind of against my whole ethos anyway and what I'm trying to do here. So I would prefer to give this apple away and put it into the public domain like everything else. Now, for me, for a long time I've had this idea that works more on like a social system than a legal system. I tend to think that going for legal routes like that is the wrong solution. Okay, so first of all, it creates like this sort of like division and what's the word? I can't think of the word. But there's an automatic like kind of rebellion factor, right? Where people are like, why are you going to keep me from growing that? And that's just like not the vibe I want to put out there. The whole apple breeding project from the start has been about like people participating and again making it about the fruit and the people and our human family and improving things for future generations, right? So my solution that I have in my head is more like, it would be like an idea with a name that's attached to the apple wherever it goes, right? So this apple would be under this concept basically, and under this sort of system, if you want to call it that. Instead of saying, you're growing my apple, you owe me money, it's like, hey, you're growing my apple, consider like throwing some funds back at me so I can keep doing this. Like, if nothing else, just as a thank you for producing the apple, but preferably like, yeah, here's some funds, like keep doing this to do what the mission is basically, which is to recreate apple diversity and create a bunch of smiles on a bunch of people's faces, whether they're grafting the apple and they're like, oh yeah, I got this apple, or they're eating it for the first time, or their kids biting into it and just going like, wow, this is amazing. So that's what it's really all about to me. So I favor a system like that, and I think it could work. This is another topic altogether, but basically what we'd have is like a central digital place for breeders to showcase their work, introduce themselves, and say like, this is me, this is my mission statement, these are the fruits that I bred, and then each fruit would have a page. So if you look this fruit up, this is the first thing you're going to find, right, is this page. And it's going to be like, here's the history of this apple. Like this apple has a great story, right? So here's the story of this apple. And then in that space there, that digital space, you'd have the opportunity to support breeders in their work. And then for people who are using it for commercial purposes, you'd just be like, hey, if you're going to use this and make money off it, like just kick back a certain amount per tree. Like you can graft them, you can buy them from a nursery, or if the nursery already has grafted them, like maybe they pay a certain amount back. And instead of being like, you owe us this is the law, it would be, again, a social system where there's thousands and thousands of people that know that you should be giving something back, right? It's kind of like an honor system and just sort of a little bit of like social leverage, right? I think that idea could work, and I think that it's a better solution. It's a more human solution. It helps us evolve, socially to where we should be going, right? Versus like everybody hates the legal system and laws and like the red tape and the bureaucracy that it creates, and then having to sue people and all that crap, screw that. So that's my idea. If anyone would want to work on something like that, because there's no way I could put that together and run it, not even a little. But I'd like to see it happen. And if anyone gets excited about that, contact me, because I think it could work. And I think it could work for all plants, because, part of my thing with breeding apples too, and encouraging other people to breed apples, which has worked great, there's all kinds of people doing it now, is to get people to breed other things, to look at stuff and say, like what's the potential in this plant? For me, I'm interested in loquats, avocados, citrus. I think a lot of people would think, well, if it could be done, it would already be done, or it's too hard, or, there's experts working on that. No, there really aren't. And the experts that are working on it are breeding for markets, right? So they're breeding stuff that looks good. My friend talked to a peach breeder who had spent his whole life breeding peaches. He just expressed disappointment in the work that he had done because he's like, we weren't breeding good peaches. We were breeding peaches that would hold up in the supermarket. And if you've ever had a bad supermarket peach, which when you buy peaches, they're usually not very good, there you go. That's what happens when we leave it up to people like that. As far as me releasing this, I just need to think on it a little bit. I'm willing to hear your feedback. The more support I get through Patreon, donations. Some people, I have a guy that sends me $100 cash every month to just do what I'm doing, and that's awesome. Shout out to that guy, thanks. Other people just send me random donations, but Patreon is kind of like the bread and butter of like monthly checks that I get. They're going to help me buy a new homestead because this project is in jeopardy. I hate to say that, like I've hesitated to say that because I don't want to sound dramatic, but I have to move from this homestead. I've been here for 17 years. I've been breeding apples for 12 of that, and I have to move all that stuff. And the silver lining is that I want a better place. I want more flat ground, flat fertile ground, and if I can have that and a tractor and I'm secure there and I don't have to leave, because I've been developing places and leaving my entire life. That's my life basically. And this was supposed to be the place I wasn't going to have to leave, but for various reasons I have to leave. So hopefully the silver lining is I'll get a better place, and if I can get a tractor and some flat fertile ground, I can put in a lot of stuff really fast. And this is not my only project. I have numerous large-scale projects. Most of them have to do with horticulture that I want to do. And I'm going to need a lot of funds, like not just to get land, but I need funds for like, yeah, again, a tractor, a truck. I want a garden and orchard manager to help run all this stuff because I'm maxed out already. And the other part of this project continuing forward is providing seeds, pollen, and scions for other amateur breeders and small-scale breeders. And I'm maxed out on that too. Like I can only make so many cross-pollinations a year, collect so much pollen. A lot of my time now, and why I don't produce as much content, is it's all spent on trying to scrounge up money so I can buy a new place. And if I run any of this stuff as a business, that's not my job. Like I'm not a farmer or a business person or a nurseryman. I'm an experimenter. My product is, obviously new varieties, but it's knowledge mostly, information and knowledge. And so if I take any one of my projects and say, well, how can I monetize this project, which can happen to an extent, but if that's the primary goal, it perverts the process of research and development because now you're serving the bottom line and you don't take chances. It breeds like a mental and operational conservatism where you're not going to take as many chances. Like this is about taking chances. If I need to do an experiment, I just want to be able to do it. I need the resources to do it without worrying about, is this going to pan out and bring in this much money, in this amount of time. So it's just a different mindset. Now people could take all kinds of stuff that I'm going to be doing and spin that off and turn it into businesses, and that's awesome. It's just not my job, and it shouldn't be my job because I'm good at what I do. I've spent the last 8 years doing YouTube and blogging and stuff to demonstrate my value and that I can pull stuff off. This is a great example of that right here. I could easily dispense to good effect millions of dollars in the next whatever time I have left. I kind of think of it as 20 years, like I have 20 years left. I'm turning 56 in a month. That's how it works. You don't have so much time, and we tend to have like a gradual lowering of our capacity to function, right, and be productive. I'm hoping that will not be the case, but it's safer to assume so. A very good friend of mine from the fruit community right now, he's like been a mentor to me and a lot of other people, is very sick. There's a good chance he won't be around much longer. And that just kind of, drove it home even more for me, although this has been my mentality for a while. It's like, how much time do I have left? This is a war from now to then of how much I can get done and how many positive ripples I can make in the world in various things that I do. That's where I'm at right now. The solutions to these problems are, well, the ways you can help are share content. Obviously watch content, that's great. Share content, talk about it, talk about my work. I'm interested in doing like interviews, podcasts, things like that, news stories. whatever works. That will help grow my audience so that, things like Patreon can be expanded. So, my job in all of that is basically to keep doing as much as I can with projects. I'm trying to put this Apple thing on the back burner a little bit. I'm not planting anything more in the ground here that's going to stay. Because that's just a waste of my time, right? I'm going to be moving stuff. But I am putting in a large nursery bed of trees. I'm buying rootstock this year that I'll plan on taking with me in the next 2 or 3 years, which hopefully I'll get a place within that amount of time. And presenting like the vision, like that's a big part of my job, is presenting the vision in a way that people will want to support it, right? I mean, which isn't difficult. I just need to talk, basically, because I'm super enthusiastic and passionate about this and all my other projects. So I'll be trying to continue doing seed scions and pollen as long as I can, but I can't expand that until I get like a garden and orchard manager, which is one of my major goals, is to hire a full-time garden and orchard manager that I can say, okay, this is what we're doing, keep track of this, like make the stuff happen, make sure stuff gets watered, pruned, collected, listed, all of that stuff. And they'll span across multiple projects: fruit tree training, grafting, and a bunch of other stuff. And other breeding projects. In the meantime, maybe I'll have some of these scions available this year. They'll be auctioned off on Figbid along with Appaloosa. And as soon as I can get more material, like more grafting material, I'll eventually put that into my web store, and the price will come down, and we'll get as many of these things out as possible and get other people breeding with them. Like, this is amazing breeding stock right now. Consider supporting me on Patreon, or making donations works. And again, just popularizing my content and growing the channel. I'm really trying all the time to make more videos, and I just cannot get it done. It's just, there's so many things to do, and I'm behind on everything. My roof is leaking. For years, I haven't fixed my roof. During this project, I've had to quit making content or doing much of anything else to sell personal belongings and stuff to get money, just to get by, right? I mean, this has been a long road to get to this point. And now I'm actually saving money. Like, Patreon's doing really well. I have some other projects that are bringing in money, and I'm actually saving money, and I think I'll get a good down payment within a year or two, depending on how things go. But yeah, again, the more the merrier, because it's not just about getting the land. I need resources, and a lot of that's going to be money. There's just no way around it. This is just a great win. It's put new wind in my sails. Not just this, but other apples that I got this year that are super promising. I named another little crab called Tomboy that looks very, very good. The potential for just my project in breeding apples is huge. I'm going to produce so many amazing apples, I can tell from the results I've had so far. But there's then the ripple effects that have gone out from this project that have gotten other people involved. They can now take, because as soon as I get something good like this, I'm sending out pollen as soon as I can, because that's the whole point of breeding, is to build on past successes so other people can do that work too. And yeah, woohoo.